Today's lecture begins with the story of the golden calf, which is towards the tail end of the book of Exodus, and will segue into the book of Leviticus, which is the next book in the Bible and the next book in the Pentateuch. In this particular story, we find the Israelites now out of Egypt. They have followed Moses and been led by Moses out of slavery, and they come back to Mount Sinai, really where it all began for Moses, where he encountered God in that burning bush, in that theophany. And what happens is Moses goes up the mountain to pray and to commune with God, and while the people are waiting, they get a little anxious and they get impatient. So Moses is up on the mountain for 40 days, again, that symbolic number. And the people can't wait that long. So in the meanwhile, they ask Aaron, Moses' brother, to create for them a false idol. And he takes all their jewelry, all their gold, melts it down, and there's this golden calf that they essentially worship and offer sacrifices to. So they've just established this covenant with God, and now they're already breaking these commandments. And we may be asking ourselves, well, what's going on here? Why are they worshiping this golden statue of a bull? And so let's take a look at that for a moment. So the golden calf, it may seem silly to us, but if you recall, during the plagues, one of the Egyptian gods is the god Apis, which took the form of a bull. So this story here, they've just left Egypt, but obviously the Egypt hasn't left them just yet, because the Israelites are essentially practicing some polytheism here and potentially reverting back to some of their practices in Egypt. But let's also look at what this bull represents. This golden calf, number one, represents power. So the bull itself is a symbol of power, and the Egyptian god Apis was a fertility god. So the bull represents power. Secondly, the gold that was melted down to create this golden calf represents wealth. And in that story, we hear that they were engaging in some playful activities representing the lure of pleasure. So what we really have here in this story of the golden calf is the same temptations that humankind always faces. And the Israelites were no stranger to these. So the bull represents power, the gold representing wealth, and play representing pleasure. And here's an image of a cartoon where Aaron, if we read further in the story, Aaron, when Moses comes down from the mountain, Mount Sinai, Aaron acts as if he had nothing to do with this, that the gold was thrown in the fire, and out popped this golden calf. So Aaron's trying to deny his involvement, and Moses is very upset, and he, in fact, ends up smashing the 2 tablets with the 10 commandments on the ground. So Moses has a bit of a temper. We saw this as he killed the Egyptian guard earlier in his life, and we see it here again as he is so upset and enraged by the people's turning away from God so quickly. Now, the next part of the story, wandering in the desert. The Israelites are going to be spending 40 years in the desert. This is going to be our next time period in our next books in the Bible. So you can see the 3 titles there, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The next time period that in our chart that we've been following is the desert wandering. So we're leaving Egypt after the Exodus, and we're entering the book of Numbers, and we're entering the desert where the Israelites will remain for 40 years. And if you notice, the book of Leviticus and the book of Deuteronomy both kind of bookend the book of Numbers. So the book of Numbers tells this story of the 40 years in the desert, while Leviticus takes place at the foot of Mount Sinai right after the golden calf incident, and the book of Deuteronomy finds its place at the end of their journeying in the wilderness, so at the end of those 40 years. And here you can see a map of the Exodus account, and the land of Goshen is where the Israelites begin their journey, right, hearkening back to Joseph and his descendants. And you can see where they cross the Red Sea there, way up north on the border of Egypt. And then they make their way down to Mount Sinai. So that is where the 10 Commandments are received. And that's where the book of Leviticus finds its context. And then the next 40 years are spent in the wilderness. And finally, the book of Deuteronomy brings us right to the end of really the story of Moses, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. So the book of Leviticus gets its title from the tribe of Levites. So what Leviticus is essentially a priestly manual. It's not the most exciting reading. It's not really narrative. It's not really carrying the story forward. It's really a manual that was developed at the foot of Mount Sinai by the Levites. And the Levites become the priestly tribe because they were the only ones to step up and reject the worship of the golden calf. So while everyone else was turning away from God and worshiping that false idol, the Levites were the one tribe who said, nope, this isn't right. We've made a commitment to God, and therefore they're rewarded in a sense as they will now serve as the priests. The book of Numbers, the fourth book in the Bible, begins where Exodus left off at Mount Sinai. So after the golden calf, a year goes by, and Israel is going to celebrate the Passover. So it's been 1 year from the first Passover event, the Exodus itself, before they depart for a fresh new start. And Moses, during their journey, is going to send some spies, 12 spies representing the 12 tribes of Israel. He'll send them to kind of case out and check out the promised land and see what it's about. And out of those 12 spies, 10 of them come back and report to Moses and the other elders that we can't take this land. I know God promised it, but there's people in there and they look pretty formidable, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to do this. But Caleb and Joshua are the only ones who kind of remind the people we've got to trust in God if we want to take this land. This is God's plan. We've got to follow it. And so Caleb and Joshua, out of all those spies, they're the only ones who actually enter the promised land. Moses and his generation, they will all pass away before they actually enter the promised land. And it will be Joshua who leads them into the promised land. So this brings us to the fifth book and the final book of the Pentateuch, Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy literally means the second law. And that's because Moses reiterates to all the people, essentially before he dies, he's letting them know and reminding them of all the laws that have already been revealed, including the commandments. And the famous prayer, the Shema, it finds its place in this book. And it's on your screen now, at least coming up there. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, and you shall love the Lord our God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength. And that finds its place in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And this prayer is kind of, if you want an equivalent for Christians, it's the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father. It's really a foundational prayer for the Jewish people. And this book ends with the death of Moses and the people on the brink of the promised land. So this is going to segue into the next book that we study, the book of Joshua, and that will tell the tale of the Israelites actually entering the promised land, and that will be our next part of our journey through the Old Testament.